All right, let's talk about the invisible force that powers, well, pretty much everything in our lives, electricity. Now, I'm willing to bet that how you think it works isn't quite right. And trust me, the real story is so much cooler.
I mean, it seems like a pretty basic question, right? You flip a switch, your light turns on. You plug in your phone, it charges. We use it all day, every day. But have you ever really stopped and wondered, what is actually going on inside those wires?
So, first thing we need to get straight is that electricity itself is completely invisible. You've never seen it. I've never seen it. Nobody has. It's just not something our eyes can detect.
What we do see are its effects, the glow from a light bulb, the warmth from a space heater, the spin of a fan. That's not electricity you're seeing. That's just what electricity does when it gets to where it's going. It's the evidence that energy has been delivered.
Okay, now this is where the story gets really interesting. For literally centuries, our entire understanding of which way electricity flows was based on a really smart, but totally wrong guess. Back in the 1700s, you had Benjamin Franklin thinking about electricity like it was some kind of fluid. And his guess was pretty logical, right? He figured it must flow from a place with a surplus, which he called positive, to a place with a deficit, which he called negative. It was a great theory. The only tiny little problem, he had it exactly backwards. And it wasn't until over 100 years later that J.J. Thomson actually discovered the electron and proved that the flow is really from negative to positive. And because Franklin's idea was the standard for so long, we ended up with these two different models that we still deal with today. On the one hand, you have conventional current. That's Franklin's old school, positive to negative idea. You'll still see it in tons of circuit diagrams. But on the other hand, you have electron flow. That's what's really happening in the wire. So the big takeaway here is kind of wild. Most of the maps we use to describe electricity are actually drawn backward. So if the diagrams are all backwards, how are we supposed to wrap our heads around what's happening? Well, probably the best way to do it, the way that makes it all just click, is to forget the diagrams for a minute and just picture water flowing through a set of pipes.
For this analogy to work, we just need to understand three things. First up is voltage. Think of voltage as the electrical pressure. It's the push. So in our water system, voltage is like the pump that's creating all the pressure to get that water moving. More volts just means a bigger push. Next, you've got current. If voltage is the pressure pushing everything, then current is the actual flow rate. It's how much water is actually moving past a certain point in the pipe at any given moment. It's all about the volume of flow. And finally, we have resistance. This is just what it sounds like, anything that gets in the way and slows down the flow. In our water pipe analogy, it's like a narrow section or a kink in the hose that makes it harder for the water to get through. And that's exactly what something like the tiny filament in a light bulb is doing. It's resisting the flow. So let's just recap that real quick. The voltage is the pressure, the current is the flow, and the resistance is the restriction that slows it all down. Honestly, if you can just remember that simple relationship, you're well on your way to understanding pretty much any basic circuit out there. Okay, so we know that it's electrons that are flowing, but where do they all come from? And this is where it gets kind of mind-blowing. The battery or the power plant doesn't create them. They're already there, packed inside the wire itself. And the numbers we're talking about are just insane. Look at that number on your screen. That's roughly how many copper atoms are jammed into a single cubic centimeter of wire. So a wire isn't some hollow tube that electrons shoot through. It's a solid, incredibly dense crystal of atoms. So if you zoom in on just one of those copper atoms, it's got 29 protons in the center and 29 electrons orbiting around it. But the one we really care about is that single, lonely electron in the outermost shell. It's held on really loosely. It's almost like it's just looking for an excuse to jump ship. And because it's so loosely attached, this little free electron can easily hop from its home atom to a neighbor. So what you really have inside a copper wire is this dense lattice of atoms sitting in a vast sea of these mobile electrons, all just hanging out, waiting for a push. And this leads us to the most incredible part of the whole story. We've got this sea of electrons, right? And we've got the voltage from the battery ready to give them a push. But this creates a huge paradox, a really deep puzzle that our simple water analogy just can't solve. So check this out. For just 1 amp of current to flow, which isn't very much at all, about 6.2 times quintillion electrons have to drift past a single point in the wire every single second. That's a 6 with 18 zeros after it. It's a staggering number of particles. But And here's the crazy part. The actual speed of any one of those individual electrons, what scientists call its drift speed, is unbelievably slow. We're talking less than a millimeter per second. It's moving at a literal snail's pace. So how does that work? If the electrons are moving that slowly, why does the lamp on the other side of the room turn on the very instant you flip the switch? That first electron leaving the switch should take hours, maybe even days to get all the way to the lamp. What are we missing here? And here is the beautiful, elegant answer. It's not about one electron running a marathon from the switch to the light bulb. A much better way to think about it is like a line of dominoes. The second you flip that switch, an electric field pops into existence through the entire wire at almost the speed of light. That field is like the finger that pushes the first domino. It gives a simultaneous nudge to all the free electrons at once. So the electron right at the end of the wire, the one sitting right next to the lamp, starts moving instantly and delivers its energy, even though it only moved a microscopic distance. So the real story of electricity isn't about little particles sprinting through a wire. It's about an invisible field that expands at the speed of a light, commanding a huge army of trillions upon trillions of electrons to all take one tiny, perfectly coordinated step forward, all at the same time. The next time you flip a light switch, remember that. You aren't starting a race, you're conducting an orchestra.